Welcome to the War Room, Saturday, June the 6th, the year of our Lord, 2020, 76 years on from the launch of Operation Overlord, better known as D-Day, on the 6th of June 1944, when Allied forces launched the combined naval, air, and land assault on Nazi-occupied France. Joined in studio by Jack Posobiec, Jack Maxey, Greg Manns, and joining us on the line now, host of this show, Stephen K. Bannon. Steve.
Well, listen, guys, I want to thank you so much for doing this special. And here's why. You know, Raheem, the other day you talked about the Churchill speech. That was the 80th anniversary. You know, that kind of kicked this thing off when he went to Commons and said the British people would never surrender to the Nazis. And, you know, a couple of years later, 4 years later, we were actually going back to France to basically free Europe. It's incredibly important, particularly, I think, in this day and time when you see the streets of our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., with people who want to erase the memory of American history and erase all the great achievements we've had. And it's more important than ever, not just to wait to the 75th anniversary and the 80th anniversary and all these things, but to really honor these every year and every opportunity we get. I think it's very, very important. And Raheem, I think this show is incredible because we've got Patrick K. O'Donnell, who's the best combat historian of his generation, to tell the story of the young boys of the Army Rangers and the 101st Airborne that went to Pointe du Hoc. We have the airborne assault at Utah Beach. Jack Posobiec, who's a naval intelligence officer, tells this incredible story of Operation Fortitude, of the intelligence operation that split the German army and allowed us to hit the beach without the maximum force of the Germans against us. And then, Raheem, I think one of the most powerful things is your story, how as a young British kid you were never taught the story of D-Day, or the story of the British forces in World War II. And so it's more important than ever that we commemorate these tremendous victories in Western civilization. And I think this is going to be a fantastic show today. I want to thank AVN, Patrick K. O'Donnell, John Frederick's Radio Network, all of our partners to make this possible. These things are very difficult to pull off, and thank you guys. I'll be back for the second hour to talk about the new China. But I think this hour is just going to be incredible, and I know it'll be replayed again and again and again.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us here to intro this show. It's an incredibly important thing. This is what links us, another link between, across the Atlantic for us, and we're very grateful to have Patrick K. O'Donnell on the show today as well to talk us through all of these things. Steve, just before we let you go on this, I wanted to just ask you your personal experiences and stories with this. I think Jack also has familial experience. Greg does too. I'm sure Jack Posobiec as well. Steve, just talk to us a little bit why this is so important to you as a man. Well, we don't have Steve for the follow up there, but we'll get back to that when we have Steve on in the next hour as well. We are here in the War Room on Capitol Hill talking about the D-Day Valor and victory. Patrick K. O'Donnell, who's joining us on the line. Do we have Patrick? Mr. O'Donnell?
Hey, Raheem.
How you doing there, sir?
I'm right here.
Hey, Patrick, we're really grateful to have you on. Talk us through a little bit from your perspective. You're one of the best historians out there. Your books are absolutely fantastic. Complete. Those sorts of books that you just cannot put down when you pick them up. Go through them real quickly, but so chock full of just the most incredible stories of valor. I wanted you to go through with us a little bit of where we're starting off with D-Day. What's the broader story, and then drill down into the specifics for us, Pointe du Hoc and more.
Sure. The broader story is this is the invasion of Europe, the main invasion of Europe, the invasion of France. And initially it's scheduled for June 5th, but weather plays a big role in the invasion. There's 156,000 Allied troops that are going to hit 5 beaches in Normandy, roughly a 50-mile coast. And this is occupied France, heavily defended occupied France. The Germans had fortified nearly all the invasion points in France, and then also positioned their armor to quickly react to any kind of invasion. And the invasion is initially scheduled for June 5th, but weather intercedes. The weather patterns are not favorable on that day, and a young Air Force officer with the Royal Air Force, basically convinces Eisenhower to postpone the entire invasion on June 5th. The weather is important because there's tidal patterns that are only available on in a few certain days, 5th and 6th, and then 2 weeks later. And he convinces Eisenhower to postpone one day because there's a weather pattern that'll be favorable in the early morning hours of the 6th. And it's incredibly important because we had advance warning of the weather from stations that we had in Greenland. The Germans did not have. They literally thought that the invasion would not take place for another 2 weeks. And Rommel himself actually left the invasion area to head home to Germany. And it's really quite interesting because had they gone forward with the invasion 2 weeks later, there was a massive nor'easter-type storm that would have swamped the entire invasion and made it impossible.
Wow.
So the delay is important. And it's June 6th that the invasion takes place. And that starts with a airborne component where there are roughly 20,000 Allied airborne troops that land behind the invasion beaches. And the portion that I'm most familiar with is the 82nd and 101st contribution behind Utah Beach. I began interviewing World War II veterans almost 30 years ago. I volunteered as I got out of college to start interviewing World War II veterans, and that's been my kind of cause. It's been going out and interviewing these guys, and they're telling the stories. And it's really important.
Patrick, can you tell us a little bit more about that, especially for people out there? You know, we know and we see the commemorations as they occur, and we see when the politicians get up there and when the Queen gets up there and talks. But for you, when you go out and do these interviews, can you tell us a little bit more about what you learn yourself, and maybe share with the audience some of the poignant stories?
This is just a remarkable generation of individuals that are now in their very late 90s. And most of the individuals that I interviewed were very close friends of mine, and most of them have passed. The beginning for me was in roughly 1992 when I started interviewing members of the 82nd Airborne Division. I specifically interviewed the Pathfinders. And these were the guys that were at the very tip of the spear of the Allied invasion. These were paratroopers that were dropped in behind the lines to bring in the main airborne body. They set up Eureka and homing devices, basically, that allowed the planes to zero in on their position. And from there, they were able to bring in planes. But the problem was that most of the Pathfinders were misdropped. Of the 16 groups that were dropped in, most of them were scattered all over the place. They weren't able to obtain their equipment and bring it in. And this caused massive scattering of the drops.
Patrick, we're delighted to be joined by Patrick O'Donnell, one of the foremost historians in this field. How many tons of equipment are we talking about here that had to be landed ahead of this invasion? The airborne piece was about 20,000 men, and it began on the night of June 6th. Around midnight. The first member of the invasion that dropped in was a member of the SAS. It's the British Special Services, Special Forces, if you will, for World War II. He drops in, and then it's followed by the American Airborne, as well as British Airborne. The British take a place called Pegasus Bridge, which is incredibly important. It's near a place called Caen in the British beaches, which prevents the bridge is important to take because they don't want the SS Armour to hit the beachhead, so the bridge is taken by glider. But going back to the American component, this is these Pathfinders teams come in and they're misdropped. There's clouds and everything else, and it just breaks up the invasion. I want to throw it open here as well and ask an open question to anyone here to discuss this. At the same time this was going on, I mean, the plans that had been in, I say plans in place. The plans were constantly changing and constantly had to be fluid for this. But there was a great reluctance on the British side, if correct me if I'm wrong, who actually Churchill was more interested and had more sympathy towards maybe looking at the Mediterranean, looking at Portugal. They didn't necessarily believe that they had the discipline because having had lost so many professional army soldiers, were also reliant in large part on conscripts. Patrick, can you just talk to us a little bit about that?
Please repeat that question again, Raheem.
Just about the British reluctance to necessarily pursue a strategy which was concentrating all forces in the north of France, rather than going an alternative route and trying to wear the Wehrmacht down in a different way.
Well, initially there was a plan to coincide the landings in southern France with the D-Day invasion in northern France, but that was just there was a shortage of landing craft. It was just not possible to do it at exactly the same time. So they spaced it out. I mean, this is a big deal. Landing craft for just assets, the sheer amount of this invasion is this is the largest invasion in history, world history. They just don't have enough assets to cover both areas. So they decide to land at Normandy. And there's a massive deception operation that's involved with this. Everything from a fake army that's led by Patton, which includes blow-up tanks, to an operation that they take every German agent that's inside of the UK and turn them. And they turn them to provide somewhat accurate but false information that will lead the Germans to believe that the actual invasion is at a place called Calais. And the Germans concentrate a lot of their forces at Calais.
Jack Maxey, the quote, well, there it is, it won't work, but you must bloody well make it. Field Marshal Sir Alan Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, speaking to General Sir Frederick E. Morgan in 1943, when the plans were being put in place for something like this. The British had incurred just so much damage, right? Just so much loss, and of course, still really reeling from a defeat, a retreat at Dunkirk. So you could talk to us a little bit about the backdrop.
Well, I think that the British were starting to get their legs back. Certainly, once the Americans had entered the war, particularly the air war, earlier, there were thousands and thousands of American troops stationed in England. I think that while you mentioned this reluctance of the British to go forward, I think it's a side story to the real history. I think that the British people were ready to go. I think there was no chance to get even more ready. I think the real, many times in history, I'm going to sidetrack here a little bit, the U.S. always seems to have some metaphysical thing come in and change things. The weather, for example, on the invasion of D-Day. The fact that Erwin Rommel was injured a few days before and was sent back to Germany, so that there was a little bit of disorganization in terms of how they were going to command the armored forces around the landing beaches. It seems so many times, and Patrick, you've talked about this before, how there's almost a divine intervention that seems to creep into our plans and help us.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, gentlemen, Patrick, we'll come back from the break with this in just a moment, because we have a break coming up here. I agree with you, Jack. By the way, the public, I believe, maintained that fighting spirit throughout. What I mean is there was somewhat of a reluctance on the strategy from British military leadership. We'll get into more of that though as well as we continue this show. D-Day special, Valor and Glory. Jack Posobiec, Greg Manns, Jack Maxey, Patrick K. O'Donnell, Raheem Kassam, and we're grateful for Stephen K. Bannon joining us in the first hour here. We'll be back with him in the second hour as well. Make sure you stay tuned. This is The War Room.
War Room with Stephen K. Bannon. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room. Raheem Kassam sitting in here for Stephen K. Bannon on assignment. Jack Posobiec, Jack Maxey, Greg Manns, and joining us down the line, historian Patrick K. O'Donnell, one of my favorite. If you can have favorite historians like the nerd I am, Patrick K. O'Donnell is one of my favorite historians out there. We want to thank our broadcast partners for helping us put together this special D-Day special, America's Voice.News, Newsmax, John F. Frederick's Radio Network, all of our local partners, radio partners across the country, and of course blown through the CCP firewall into China thanks to G News and GTV, subtitled in Mandarin. For the people that don't get to hear these stories in China, the Lao Beijing and every piece of the War Room team and show, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's the political stuff, the campaign 2020 stuff, the guys at G News and GTV do an excellent job here. And of course, thanks to our sponsors. NetSuite by Oracle is the world's #1 cloud business system. And of course, 2020 has not been kind to a lot of American businesses so far. So if you're going to succeed, you need every possible advantage. You can get your guide right now at netsuite.com/Bannon. netsuite.com/Bannon. Right, gentlemen, I want to throw it back to Patrick K. O'Donnell here. Jack, you had an incredibly important point, Maxie, of the divine intervention as it is often taken place in favor of the Allies, in favor of the United States. I had to butt in on Patrick O'Donnell before throwing it to him there. We were up against the break. But Patrick, bring us back on that point.
Sure. I'm going to take you to that point with the most dangerous mission at D-Day, and I wrote about it in a book called Dog Company, and this is about the Rangers at Pointe du Hoc. And Pointe du Hoc was a rocky spear that kind of juts out between Omaha and Utah Beach. And the reason why it's important is that there were 5 heavy guns that were on Pointe du Hoc on the top of it that could hit either beachhead on either side or the naval forces out in the channel. And it had to be taken at all costs. They plastered Pointe du Hoc for a month with heavy bombers, fighter bombers, and shells even from battleships, and nothing could take out these heavy guns. So they sent in the Rangers. This is the most dangerous mission of D-Day because it's a frontal assault on a 90-foot cliff.
Wow!
And there were 2 elements to the attack on Pointe du Hoc, 2 Ranger forces. And I'll get to this in a second. How divine intervention can change the course of history, or a series of events can change the course of history, even a small one. And the Ranger Force, which consists of about 3 companies of Rangers, 225 men, are the initial force that have to scale Pointe du Hoc. And the landing craft for that unit is late because of a series of navigation errors on the part of a young lieutenant in the Royal Navy, and his navigation system isn't working that day. He literally starts to take the entire Ranger force to another point of the invasion, and they become 45 minutes late because of it. But this changes the course of history because if they had landed on time, the airborne assault, the bombers that were plastering Pointe du Hoc were also late. The bombs would have landed on the landing craft. But secondly, it also diverts the secondary force that the Rangers are with, and I'll get to that in 1 minute. As the Rangers get off the landing craft at Pointe du Hoc, they're hit by MG-42 machine gun fire, which has a rate of fire of about 1,200 rounds per minute for a machine gun. Some of the barrels were literally burning out because they were firing so many rounds at the Rangers. They were throwing grenades down at them. There were IEDs that were suspended from the side of the cliff, and these guys had to climb up ropes under this direct fire. As they got to the top, they sent out the code word for the rest of the Rangers that were waiting for them to come aboard, but that radio signal never got there for some reason. And what it did is it has a profound impact on history and one of the great inflection points. That force of over 800 men from the 5th Ranger Battalion, along with 2 other companies of Rangers, are diverted to Omaha Beach. At this time, at Omaha Beach, it was a charnel house. Literally, men, you kind of remember Saving Private Ryan, that opening scene where the doors of the landing craft are opening, and men are just getting machine gunned to death. There's 88. There's rounds from German 75s and 88s that are hitting the landing craft and blowing up. I mean, some of the guys with flamethrowers literally are hit. Their tanks are hit and they explode. I mean, the invasion at Omaha Beach is at a critical point. And they're literally talking about bringing everybody off the beachhead back to the ships, which would have had a profound impact on the entire invasion. But at this crucial point, call it divine intervention or a strange course of events, the Rangers that were supposed to go at Pointe du Hoc are then to Omaha Beach. And they're supposed to land at a place called Dog Green. But the officer on board, the Ranger officer on board, Max Schneider, negotiates with the Royal Navy to land on Dog White a little bit over to the left, and it changes the course of the invasion. It's not as the beach is not as heavily defended. They bring off the entire 5th Ranger Battalion, which lands intact, and they spearhead the invasion off Omaha Beach. The famous phrase, Rangers lead the way, comes from this beachhead, where the Rangers are given that direct order, and they literally do lead the way, and the main breakthrough off of Omaha Beach, which changes the course of history. This is the invasion that changes the course of history and breaks Germany's back.
Extraordinary. Jack?
Well, I mean,
Jack.
Go ahead, Jack.
Well, I was just going to throw out that, even to this day, whenever a Ranger renders a salute, that is the phrase that they send off. Rangers lead the way. So even when I be in joint commands or joint task forces, and you're seeing Rangers, I served under a Ranger in a joint unit at Guantanamo Bay, who is famously recounts all of those stories to us and the history of his unit, and that phrase and that story, that moment is so important to the morale of the Rangers. It's part of their ethos, it's part of their day-to-day life, it's part of their esprit de corps, and it is immortal. It is absolutely immortal.
Maxie?
Well, I mean, listen, these guys are part of American lore. They're part of our American history. There's something that we can all be proud of. And I think that one thing that really needs to be pointed out on a day like this, while we're watching the whole country enraged and street brawls out there, to remember that the young men who landed that day look very much like the young men who are out there robbing targets today. And to me, it's shameful. And I think that we, the good Americans, the ones of us who want to see this country succeed, should look back and find strength from these great individuals, because it should give all of us a kind of tonic for the difficult times that we're in right now.
I think it's such an important point. This is something that I think Americans take for granted a little bit in their education, and in the great historians and the public figures that you guys have, is you actually tell the human stories of this. And we didn't really have that growing up in England. It was kind of, you would learn the general themes of what happened and why it happened, but really hearing the stories from Patrick O'Donnell and from hearing, Rangers lead the way, and just these little things that create history, but are still massively part of who we are, I'm afraid in a lot of the Western world have been lost. In any of your guys' opinion, let's start with Patrick. Is it recoverable in outside of America, in the Western world, to bring the stories of great Europeans and great Brits who contributed in the way that you've done so successfully with Americans, Patrick?
I think that there's great stories around the world from various cultures. Now, the story with Pointe du Hoc that I think that's important, that the viewers really should take away from here, is this Pointe du Hoc was important because these guns had to be neutralized. They threw everything at it. Battleship shells that were 14-inch. They spent a month bombarding it with B-17s, B-26s, B-25s. Nothing could take these guns out. But a single individual was able to do it. And he was able to do it by shell power. As he was climbing that rope, Leonard Lamel was shot through the side by an MG-42 machine gun bullet. And he kept going. He kept climbing up that rope. And as they got to the top, Pointe du Hoc resembled a miniature fortress. There were bunkers everywhere. There were anti-aircraft guns that were firing at them. There were machine guns, and it was a maze of twisted tunnels and bunkers. And then the top of the casement had been overturned by the heavy bombing. So it resembled kind of the crater of a moon, where the Germans were embedded inside of these various tunnels and bunkers. And he literally had to fight through this with a machine gun bullet on his side that he was hit by. And the guns themselves were not where they were supposed to be. They were supposed to be in the encasements on top of the cliff, but they were over 1,000 yards away. And I think this is what makes the American troops different from the men that they were fighting.
Right.
Who the Germans were superbly trained. I mean, these were some of the best troops that we've got that were in World War II. Magnificently trained, but they weren't able to improvise. I've heard this multiple times they weren't able to improvise on the fly. And here's a situation where
Patrick, we're going to jump to a break. Hold that thought. We're going to come back with you.
Finds those guns.
Right after this break, we'll finish that off, and then to Jack Posobiec, Operation Fortitude. This is War Room, the special, the D-Day special. Valor and Glory. Jack Posobiec, Jack Maxey, Greg Manns, Raheem Kassam, Patrick O'Donnell will be back after this break. Patrick?
War Room with Stephen K. Bannon. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Stephen K. Bannon is out on assignment today. We're filling in for him here in the War Room. It is Saturday, June the 6th, year of our Lord, 2020. 76 years on from the beginning of Operation Overlord. Jack Maxey, you were regaling us in the break with some statistics that I think are so important for people to understand why we're doing this and why it's so important that we tell these stories and tell these stories again and again and again.
You know why it's important? Because these are American stories. These are the stories of your culture. These historical stories are things that should give you strength and pride and give you courage. Because if one man can do it, you can do it too. That's the whole idea. And also, we have to remember, last year there were 500,000 World War II veterans still alive out of 16 million in uniform. Today, there are only 300,000. They estimate of the men who fought at Normandy, less than 1,000 of them are alive today. And for me, it's very poignant because these were my uncles and my grandfathers and all the men who I had as role models as a young man. So, history is really it's a continual story of one human life after another. And even myself, I'm feeling a little dotage because it doesn't seem so long ago that I was pitching horseshoes and being taught lessons of life by all those great old men who today would be pushing 100 years old.
Patrick, if we still have you, I just wanted to let you finish the point where we came back, we had the break, if there was anything to clean up there, but also then if you would move us on, and we throw it to Jack Posobiec as well on this one, to Operation Fortitude. Patrick.
Len Lamel, who was shot in the side from machine gun bullets as he scaled Pointe du Hoc, then made it to the top and had to work his way through a maze of machine guns and anti-aircraft guns. And this is the point that I was trying to make. Americans are able to improvise. Instead of halting the mission, he saw that there were tire tracks and surmised that might have been where the guns had gone, and literally followed those tracks and had to fight through several German machine gun nests and positions, and was able to plant explosive devices, which were thermite grenades, on the gears of those guns and disable them. It's really quite a remarkable story.
Amazing. Posobiec.
Yeah, so Patrick already spoke to this a little bit,
Yep.
but Operation Fortitude was really a year-long planning and intelligence information operation, deception operation, denial and deception, D2 is what we refer to now as the military. And every intel officer is offered this training as you go through and working your way up as an intel officer in the intelligence community now. And I went through this training with DIA, and we delved deep into this planning. So to paint the picture for this, and as everybody knows, the Atlantic Wall is set up. The Nazis, the German High Command, have fortified the entire beachhead there across France, across every country along the way. However, they don't know where the invasion's going to come, and of course, where Normandy is, and we know the backstory now, so the cat's out of the bag 76 years later. But beforehand, they didn't know, and Normandy is not the closest point across the English Channel from France, where it's actually Dover to Calais. That's of course where the train is today. And so at that point, you've got the two generals, right? The two generals at the front. You've got Erwin Rommel and you've got George S. Patton. And Rommel and Patton had already squared off in North Africa, right? The Desert Fox. Well, Rommel's up there again, and Patton's on English, and they're on the English Channel side, and they're staring, they're staring across the channel at each other. And Rommel thinks, well, Patton's the lead, so this is going to come wherever Patton is, because Patton's their greatest general. But Eisenhower understood that dynamic. And so what Eisenhower does is he sends Patton to Dover Castle. And Rommel then thinks, if Patton's at Dover, they're coming from Dover to Calais. And he maintains that entire structure and sends that back to German High Command because of his status with his credibility with High Command. They take his assessment to be the lead. And the whole thing's a trick. And of course, the British, because of Bletchley Park, they know what the German High Command is saying, because they've through the Ultra program, they've cracked the Enigma machine, but they've done it in such a way that the Germans never discover the fact that they've cracked this machine. So you've got, this is, we call it spy versus spy now. So we're looking at you, but you don't know that we're looking at you. So we're sending disinformation, we're sending cables, we're sending fake documents that are found. We're sending so much fake plans. We're coming to Norway, we're coming to Portugal, we're coming to South France, we're coming up through Sicily. Actually, prior to the invasion of Sicily, there was at one point, it wasn't part of this, but a separate deception operation that's infamous, or in the intelligence community, where Operation Mincemeat, and this was primarily a British operation, where they actually found a cadaver, dressed him up as a military, sort of a courier, and then dropped him in the sea off the coast, the southern coast of Spain, where it was picked up with fake invasion plans of South Spain, when actually the invasion was coming to Sicily. This was from about a year before, 1943. There's a great movie about it that actually has one of the actual officers playing in it. And, so these deception operations were constantly going on with the Allied forces, and they were just, to use the phrase, they were running game on German High Command throughout all of this. And so when they send him to Dover Castle, they create an entire fake army group. They call it the First Army Group, and he's given a budget. So, you have to make it look like there's an entire army there. How do you do that? Well, he's renting hotel rooms. He's buying food on a regular basis, because they know they have the spies there. So they're buying food there, and then they'll go out into town. And when they go out into town, they're all wearing, it's Patton and his officers wearing logos that are false. They're fake logos, because they're expecting to be seen, and then word to get around that, okay, all right, so this it was this unit, and it was this division of that unit, and so everything that they could do for weeks leading up to the invasion to make it look as though there was actually a fictitious army. And it was completely phantom, to include fake landing craft, fake tanks in some cases. And it was so effective, and this is key, and this is what Patrick mentioned earlier, it was so effective that all the way up until August, September, October, the Germans still thought that Normandy was a diversion, and that there was a greater force still planning to come at Calais.
Isn't that incredible? It reminds me of Churchill's great comment about truth and lies in wartime. He says, In wartime, truth is so precious, she should always be attended to by a bodyguard of lies.
And this is Sun Tzu. This is the implementation of Sun Tzu, all war is deception, in that, which really was, and the British actually called it Operation Bodyguard, right? And it was the bodyguard of the invasion of Normandy.
And you had the simulation of radio chatter between these
Of course,
units and everything.
fake signals information, fake all this disinformation that they're just spreading on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Fake calls back and forth.
Full army units, except without the army.
Right, exactly.
Effectively.
And people doing voices across the channel, and
exactly.
then
Let's go to
they're
Patrick.
reading it from Ultra.
Patrick, jump in here.
And then there was something else called Operation Double Cross, where they took all of the agents that were in England and doubled them. They put them under the barrel of a gun and said, okay, you have a choice. You can either die or work for us. And every one of these agents then worked for the British intelligence, MI6, and they were then doubled. And they sent back misinformation in their reports. Some of it was accurate. They wanted the Germans to believe that what these guys were giving them was credible. And then they had to make sure that everything that the agent received was something that they could actually obtain from their location and their contacts.
Extraordinary. Jack, you mentioned the living history of this, the way that you still learn it and study it. Just open question to the team. What other parts of the things that were either learned or put into practice during D-Day still stick with the way we do things today?
Well, the entire idea of the U.S. spreading or Allied forces really using these denial and deception operations, using disinformation ahead of major invasions. This was done throughout the Gulf War. This was done throughout the Second Iraq War, Second Gulf War, however you like to refer to it. These types of information, and actually particularly for the first Gulf War, the amounts of feints, the amounts of false information, giving fake press releases to CNN and others that were out there to make people think that invasions. In one case, there was I forget the actual name of the battle, but there was a time where the military had claimed that they had taken over, liberated a certain city in Iraq, when actually the attack hadn't even begun yet. And so when Iraqi forces heard this, they started scrambling, and Saddam was trying to figure out, what the heck is going on? Did we lose this city or not? Because keep in mind, we had already knocked out all of their communications at this point. So their entire C2 command and control infrastructure has been shut down. So Saddam not able to talk to Saddam. He's not talking to people in the field. And then the U.S. military is going to CNN and other outlets and just spreading pretty much saying whatever they want. And there's actually a funny Saturday Night Live bit that was kind of about this that we show today in OPSEC classes, where it's I think it's Phil Hartman and Kevin Nealon and Chris Farley and all of them playing journalists, and they say, just keep in mind, everyone, for this briefing, we cannot give you any tactical or operational information. And it goes, David Spade, yes, so can you tell us where exactly the invasion will take place, and how many forces there are, and which units will be taking part in this operation, and can we get their names, and maybe some of the names of the soldiers participating, and it's actually quite funny, and we still show that to this day to new recruits and people coming up and all of that builds on the lessons learned from Normandy. All of that builds on that successful legacy of diversionary tactics, denial and deception, and understanding the importance of it. What it is, it's called OPSEC, right? Yeah. Operational security, and the fact that it was used to such a high degree in 1944, June 6th, the shores of Western Europe, that it's still put into practice every single day.
Patrick, you've been so generous with your time. Just let the audience know, would you, for their benefit, where they can read more from you and your books. What is the latest?
I've written 12 books on American history from the Revolutionary War, beginning with a book called Washington's Immortals, and 7 books on World War II. Such as Dog Company or Operatives, Spies, and Saboteurs, Brennan Steinman, Into the Rising Sun, and many others. You can get them anywhere on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any bookstore. Kind of going back to your question, Raheem, what is the legacy of D-Day? What is the legacy of World War II? And much of that legacy is the formation of our modern special operations forces and modern intelligence gathering capability. Much of that is in something called the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. The OSS sent in, after D-Day, Jedburgh teams. These are 3-man special operations.
Patrick, can you stick over the break and just finish that point? I know we're pressed for time, but
sure.
It would be great if you just stuck over the course of the break. I feel really bad. We're always having to cut you off. There's a problem when you do things remotely. Right. If you were here in studio, you could give me a punch on the leg. This is the War Room D-Day special. Valor and Glory. Raheem Kassam, Jack Posobiec, Jack Maxey, Greg Mans, Patrick K. O'Donnell. We'll be right back.
War Room with Stephen K. Bannon. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
You're back in the War Room on Saturday, the 6th. That was abrupt. On Saturday, the 6th of June, the year of our Lord 2020. We're grateful for our broadcasting partners on this, and also grateful. I mean, without our partners and our sponsor, we couldn't bring you these incredibly well-produced specials with all these fantastic guests. And I want to thank NetSuite by Oracle. It's the world's #1 cloud business system. NetSuite gives you the visibility and control over your financials, HR, inventory, e-commerce, all in one place. And you've got the agility with NetSuite to compete with anyone, work from anywhere, run your whole company right from your phone. 20,000 companies now running NetSuite to make it work for them. And NetSuite actually surveyed hundreds of business leaders and assembled a playbook of the top strategies that they are already using as America reopens for business. So you can receive your free guide, 7 actions businesses need to take now, and schedule your free product tour at netsuite.com/Bannon. That's netsuite.com/Bannon. Right, gentlemen, we only have a few minutes left here, so I'll throw the floor open. Patrick K. O'Donnell, you had some just final thoughts for us there, and we had to cut you off, but I want to throw it open to you first.
Sure, I think it's the modern special operations forces, modern airborne. This is the legacy of World War II. It's where agencies like the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which formulates the U.S. Army Green Berets, it's the precursor to it, something called the operational groups and Jedburgh teams. It's also intelligence gathering, which is vital to the invasion, where there are chairborne scholars back in the United States, including diverse members of that community, which was rare at that time, which were cracking German codes or analyzing German supply lines. I think that the legacy is a rich one. It's I wrote a book called Beyond Valor, which covers this story. It's about the airborne, and one of the really interesting stories that nobody had ever told was something about the triple nickel paratroopers, and this was the first African American unit to be part of the 82nd Airborne Division. These guys were in World War II, and really quite an extraordinary doctors, lawyers after the war, and they become 2 years after the war the first integrated unit in the United States military. Just an incredible story.
Wow. Well, there's a reason that I think Military Review has called you one of the world's preeminent military historians, and the Washington Times called you one of the best historians of his generation.
Hey, Patrick, I just wanted to say you mentioned those OSS teams. Happy to say that my grandmother up in heaven was one of those people.
The OSS, Office of Strategic Services, was about 14,000 men and women. These are men and women spies from all stripes and all walks of American society and culture. These were really extraordinary individuals. I mean, we're talking about Julia Child as one of them, for instance, to members of the 82nd Airborne that become Jedburghs or part of the operational groups. A very diverse and unique set of individuals that changed the course of history.
Absolutely amazing. That's Patrick A. O'Donnell, author of The Unknowns, Washington Immortals, Dog Company, Give Me Tomorrow, We Were One, First Seals, The Brenner Assignment, so many great things. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us here on this War Room special today.
Thank you. It was an honor to be with you.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, over to you guys. Jack, I know we want more Jack Maxey.
Well, I'm not going to be angry today.
No anger today.
I'm just simply full of pride and humility thinking about our wonderful history. I do think it is important because I think it's something that we should hear. This is the message that was given to the young men by their supreme leader, General Eisenhower, on the morning of the invasion. 6 June 1944, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade towards which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you in company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts. You will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions and war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. General Dwight Eisenhower.
Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. We're talking about 156,000 on the day, and backed up by 330,000 in the coming weeks. After the first day, Winston Churchill calling it thoroughly satisfactory. I would say
3,958 heavy bombers, 1,234 medium and light bombers, 4,709 fighters. We've never seen a battle like this ever assembled in the history of mankind, and let's pray we never see one again. Let's pray that these guys did what was necessary and ended this for the future.
And one thing I want to throw out there, Raheem, and kind of answer your question from earlier about how do we preserve these stories. And it's one thing to hear the statistics and the numbers and the sheer size, but when you make the stories smaller, you also make them more intimate and more personal. And for my money, that's the HBO series, before HBO took their hard left turn, the Band of Brothers, what they did there in terms of, and that's Easy Company, they were the airborne assault that Patrick spoke about at Utah Beach prior to the amphibious assault, that it's a documentary and a docudrama. They get the actual people together.
It's amazing.
We watch it every year with my family.
Amazing. It's fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us here with this special. We'll be back with another special on China in just a moment. The new project launched by Stephen K. Bannon, Miles Kuo, and the team. You're not going to want to miss it. What's taking place over there? Beginning of the end for the CCP. We'll let you decide in just a moment. This is War Room Special. We'll be right back.